This Let's Edit with Media Composer tutorial is brought to you by VideoGuys.com, the leading reseller of video editing and production equipment for more than 25 years. And by Boris Effects, a leading developer of visual effects, titling, video editing, and workflow tools and plugins for broadcast, post-production, and film professionals. And by Rampant Design Tools, creators of QuickTime-based style effects for video and designed to significantly enhance content for editors, visual effects artists, and motion graphic designers. Hey everyone, Kevin P McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Avid Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, I want to follow up part 1 of our look at the Builder tool, or the S-Effect inside of GenArts Sapphire, by showing you how to create that very cool show opening for the inner limits. Now, I'm going to show you how we're going to get in, we're going to utilize a few different effects and how to combine them all within the Builder tool, and you're going to see very quickly why this tool is going to become an essential part of your workflow if you use Sapphire, and if you don't have Sapphire yet, why it's easily one of the best reasons to make the investment. Now, before we go on, I want to remind you that these tutorials are designed to get in and take a very in-depth look at very specific aspects of editing inside of Avid Media Composer. But sometimes you just need to get the information and get yourself up and running lightning fast. Well, if that's the case, head on over and check out my Mac Pro video training series on Media Composer, where lesson 1 will get you up and running in Media Composer in about an hour. Alright, so let's Command and Tab into Avid Media Composer, obviously an Alt and Tab for all my Windows friends out there. And as you can see, I have our title laid out in our timeline. And what's important to keep in mind about this title is I don't want you to think that it's a background layer or a mask layer, because once we get into the Builder effect, you can utilize those layers inside of Builder if you want, but in our case, this title is just going to be a standard layer like any other layer except for one slight difference. Let's head to the Effects palette, let's head to the Builder category inside Sapphire, and let's head to the S-Effect effect. I'm going to take it, drag it, and drop it down onto our shot, because what we need to make sure that we consider when working with this shot is that it is a key or a title. So we want to make sure that we tell the Builder tool that, because it's going to be important when we're working to make sure this element is keyable over top of the background that we're going to be creating. So once we apply this to the title or key, we're also going to want to make sure that our background is set to none, much like the mask. And let's come in and let's edit the effect. Now you're going to notice right away that the inner limits has now appeared over a checkerboard background. Now, depending on who's been using, GenArts Sapphire before you, you might want to get in and make an adjustment because maybe the editor liked having it like this so that he or she could see what this was being keyed over top of. And we'll get back to this in just a second because I might need to see this. But how we can turn this on and off is we can simply navigate up to the View dropdown, and you'll see right here, Show Checkerboard is selected. So I'm just going to deselect that to put our title back over top of black. Now, you'll remember that I just said that we're not going to be utilizing the mask feature, and we're not going to be utilizing the background element as well. Now, something else that's important to keep in mind, and I want to point this out as I'm clicking through, is you'll notice that as I am clicking through the nodes, the viewer up here is changing depending on which node I select. The reason it's doing that is because you'll notice down here at the bottom, the Preview Selected Node option is currently turned on. So if I turn that off, as I click through the nodes, nothing will be previewed. But for us, and I don't even really care if I disconnected that node because I'm going to need to disconnect it in just a second, so don't worry about that. But in most cases for me, as I'm clicking through the nodes, I like to see what exactly is going on so I can see the effect as it's being built all the way down to our end result. Now I did deselect or disconnect the source from the result because we're going to need to add a whole bunch of nodes in between our source and our result, so I'm okay with that having happened. Okay. Now, believe it or not, we're actually going to ignore the source for right now because I don't need to worry about our title till almost down towards the end of our build. The first effect that I need to get in and to work with is the night sky effect. Okay, there's night sky. What I'm going to do is simply click it, drag and drop into our workspace. Now, something I should point out, I had the source selected before and I deselected that, or I basically took the node and I dragged it and dropped it down here into our workspace instead of just double clicking on it. And the reason that is because if you have a node currently selected and you choose any one of the effects and simply double click on it, what's going to happen is it's going to be added down below the current node that you have selected. And since we need to build something from scratch, I don't want to have that source selected. That's why I just took the effect and dragged it and dropped it wherever I wanted it to go. Now, depending on how you like to work in the workspace, maybe you sort of like to line things up a little bit by being able to see the grid as you're working, and also having the ability to snap these nodes to the grid specifically. Now for me, I come from a shake background. That's Apple Shake from way back in the day. So for me, I'm just accustomed to having my nodes sitting over top of a gray background. Now, what we'll also have the ability to do as our composite gets to be more complex is have the ability to zoom out or zoom in on the nodes depending on what we need to see. And also, based on where you are, if you want to get back to seeing all your nodes, you can easily just come to the drop down and say zoom to fit, and boom, all of your nodes will now appear inside of the workspace. Okay, let's get in and let's start working with some parameters here. So for night sky, what I want to do is I want to make sure that the star saturation, first of all, is set to 0. I don't want to have any of those stars being blue or any other color like that. And the other parameter that I want to get in and adjust is the star size. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set that to be somewhere around 0.1. There we go. Now we have a lot of stars inside of our star field ready to go. Okay, we're now going to need to add our moon effect or our Luna effect. Now, one thing I should also point out, you'll notice that I don't need to actually type in S underscore when I'm looking for the effects. I can simply just type in the effect name and then drag it and drop it down into the workspace. Now, you'll remember when we first got into the builder, we had that checkerboard background, and the Luna effect is a perfect example of where you'd want to actually utilize that checkerboard, because if I turn it back on, we can now see exactly where our moon is positioned inside of our frame, which just makes it a lot easier to position it when you're getting everything set up. That's looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to turn that off again here. There we go. Okay, now let's add these two elements together so we can basically composite the moon over top of our star background. Now you might think that we're going to be taking our nodes and connecting them like this, but we actually need to do this through an effect. I'm just going to clear our search dialog box, and the effect that we want to use to combine these two elements together is inside of the composite category, and it is the layer effect. Now, once I've taken the layer effect and dragged it and dropped it into the workspace, I want to point out a couple things here. First of all, you'll notice that when I add the layer effect, we have a couple of nodes here. We actually have 3 nodes altogether. And to get an idea of what each of these nodes does, or what inputs you're going to want to attach to them, you'll notice that as I hover over top of it, the builder tool tells me exactly what this is. This is where you're going to want the background element to go. This is where you're going to want the foreground element to go. And if you happen to be utilizing a mask element, that's going to be able to be input over here on the left-hand side. Now for us, we know that the night sky is our background. We know that the Luna effect is our foreground. And now what we have is our moon composited over top of our star field. Very cool. Now a lot of people might get a little bit excited and start taking the layer, add it into the end result. Don't want to do that. We're now at the point where we can take our source or our title and we can combine it with our background here. Now something else I should point out is that if I select the layer element, I always have the ability to come up to the node name and type in, let's call this moon and stars composite. Okay, and as soon as I hit enter, you'll now see that that node has been renamed. So this is how we can get in and keep organization. Organization is always the key, and this is how we can keep it inside of the builder tool by getting in and naming these nodes exactly what we want to have them named as. Okay, now we're going back to the same effect, the layer effect. Drag and drop. Let's make sure that our moon and stars are the background. Let's take our text here, which is going to be the source. It's going to be the foreground element here. And now I can take the layer and drag it and drop it down to the end result. There is 2 more effects that I need to apply because we did have a damaged TV look. Now what I'm going to do is with layer 1 selected, let's come up to our TV effect. And I'm simply going to take it, and of course you'll remember, double click will add that node right directly below the layer that the node that we currently have selected. There's our TV damage. Let's make sure that it's mono, and we're about 95% of the way there. We just now need to have the ability to adjust the size of the inner limits from outside of the builder tool. Now, something else that's very important for me to mention is that if I was to come down and click OK, what's going to happen inside the effects editor is that every effect that I've added into the workspace here, I'm going to have access to all of those parameters inside of the effects editor, which is a great idea in theory. The only problem is that if you ever need to find a specific parameter for one of these elements, it's going to be a little bit tricky. But second of all, that just gives the editor coming in after me too many options to get in and change this look, which is something that I don't want them to do. The only thing that I might want to have them change is the speed at which the inner limits text is moving towards the screen. So what I have the ability to do with each one of these parameters is to turn off all of the parameters that are going to pass through to the effects editor. And the only parameter that's going to be important is going to be getting in and adjusting the text size. But the only key here is that I haven't actually applied that node yet, so let's do that. The effect that we want to find is the warp transform parameter or node right here. I'm just going to take it, drag it, and drop it in between the source and our layer 1. What this parameter lets us do is to adjust things like X and Y scale, X and Y shear, but more importantly, that Z distance. I'm going to turn everything off here except the Z distance. Now, one last thing that I want to mention before we get back out into Media Composer is you'll notice that we have this other option here that says click to change animation settings. You actually have the ability, believe it or not, right inside of the builder tool to get in and add animations to these parameters. Now, in most cases, you're going to be doing this when you're creating transitions using the builder tool, and I'm going to show you that in a later lesson. But you do have the ability to do basic parameter changes, for example, taking a parameter from 0 to whatever the current value is, in this case 1, by simply utilizing our keyframe adjustments right here. Okay, but again, like I said, I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm going to save that for a later lesson. Now, I'm very happy with the way that things are right now, so what I'm going to do is say OK. You'll give the builder tool a second to add that effect, and look at that, it's boom, done, just like that. And if you take a look over here inside the effects editor, we actually have two parameters. We have that Z distance parameter from the warp transition node, and I also have a parameter from night sky. Now, why would I have that? Well, believe it or not, there's a lens flare in there, and inside of Sapphire, you actually have a lens flare building tool. I'm just going to click on the edit flare parameter. Here we go. And again, this is something I could spend a few lessons talking about. I'm not going to talk about it now, but that's why that we have access to that edit glare parameter right there, because it's something that I didn't have the ability to turn on and off inside of the builder tool. Okay. Now, all I now need to do is to simply come to my warp transform parameter. Let's jump down to the end. I'm just going to add a keyframe. We'll just jump down to the beginning here. Let's add another keyframe, and let's add a position change. We'll just punch in a value of 1.1 here, and believe it or not, our inner limits look is now created literally with two keyframes and the power of the builder tool. So I hope this lesson has shown you what a powerful tool the builder tool actually is. In a lot of cases, a composite like the one that I just did is not something that you could do inside of Media Composer. You might be able to get about 95% of the way there, but to be honest, this is just a lot of compositing. And in most cases, you'd be going to a program like After Effects, but with the power of the builder tool right from within your Media Composer timeline, you'll be able to crank out awesome looking animations like this, literally in no time flat. Now, as we're wrapping up, I want to remind you that if you're looking for great deals on Avid Media Composer software licenses, subscriptions, and upgrades, use coupon code MC101 for 5% off any purchase at videoguys.com. MC101 is going to be a coupon code that you're going to love because the great team at Boris FX is offering a 10% discount on BCC10 AVX or multi-host licenses, full or upgrades, again using the coupon code MC101. And finally, Rampant Design Tools is offering 25% off any non-discounted product they offer in their library, again, you guessed it, by using coupon code MC101. And finally, don't forget that if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, you can send them to me at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.